The American Revolution, a nation's birth in fire and resolve. On a bitterly cold night in December 1773, a group of men disguised as Mohawk Indians crept silently toward the Boston harbor. They carried no weapons of war, no torches, only hatchets and determination. In the stillness of that night, the splash of chests hitting the icy Atlantic signaled a thunderclap that would echo across the globe. The Boston Tea Party had begun. What seemed like an act of vandalism to some would soon reveal itself as the spark that lit the American Revolution, an astonishing tale of courage, sacrifice, and nation-building. This story, though often simplified in schoolbooks, is one of the most profound in human history. How a collection of colonies rose against the mightiest empire of its age and carved out a republic unlike any the world had seen. The colonies before the storm. Before muskets roared and drums beat for war, the 13 colonies had grown for more than a century under British rule. Settlers in Virginia cultivated tobacco plantations, while Massachusetts Puritans built towns anchored around meeting houses. Pennsylvania, founded by William Penn, thrived with its Quaker traditions of tolerance. By 1750, these colonies were vibrant, distinct, and increasingly self-sufficient. Their population swelled past 2 million, fueled by waves of immigrants and a high birth rate. Yet while colonists thought of themselves as loyal subjects of King George III, they were also beginning to see themselves as something different: Americans. The seeds of discontent were sown in the aftermath of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Britain emerged victorious, but deeply in debt. The empire looked to its colonies to shoulder the financial burden. New taxes, the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, and later the Townshend Acts, fell like stones upon the shoulders of colonists. To London, these were fair measures. To the colonies, they were shackles imposed without representation. The rallying cry, "No taxation without representation," was not just a slogan, it was the heartbeat of a political awakening. Boston became the epicenter of unrest. Its streets rang with the voices of fiery orators like Samuel Adams and the whispered plans of the Sons of Liberty. The Stamp Act sparked protests so fierce that Parliament repealed it, but resentment only deepened. Tensions turned violent on March 5, 1770, when British soldiers fired upon a jeering crowd, killing 5 colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre. Patriot leaders seized upon the bloodshed as proof of tyranny. 3 years later, the Tea Act ignited another confrontation. Colonists refused to accept Britain's monopoly on tea, culminating in the Boston Tea Party's defiant destruction of 342 chests of British tea. In retaliation, Britain unleashed the Coercive Acts or Intolerable Acts of 1774. Boston's port was closed, its local government curtailed, and British troops were quartered in colonists' homes. What London saw as punishment, the colonies saw as oppression. Instead of dividing them, the acts united the colonies in outrage. From Virginia to New Hampshire, men who had never met before now spoke of a common cause: liberty. The First Continental Congress. In September 1774, delegates from 12 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Figures like George Washington, Patrick Henry, and John Adams met under one roof, pledging to resist British overreach. They agreed to boycott British goods and prepare militias. Yet many still hoped for reconciliation. Few imagined that within a year they would be calling for independence. Lexington and Concord. The shot heard round the world. On April 19, 1775, British troops marched out of Boston to seize colonial arms stored in Concord. At dawn in Lexington, they were met by a small band of Minutemen. The air was tense, silence hanging heavy, until a single shot rang out. History does not record who fired it, but its echo resounded across continents. The American Revolution had begun. By day's end, British troops were harried back to Boston, losing nearly 300 men. The colonists had shown that they would fight. The siege of Boston followed. Militiamen surrounded the city, and in June 1775, they clashed with British forces at the Battle of Bunker Hill. While technically a British victory, the heavy losses, over 1,000 redcoats killed or wounded, proved that the colonists could stand against professional soldiers. Across the colonies, resolve hardened. George Washington was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army, a tall Virginian whose quiet strength and relentless discipline would carry the cause forward. The road to independence. Even as muskets cracked and cannons roared, many colonists still dreamed of reconciliation. But King George III slammed the door on compromise. In August 1775, he declared the colonies in open rebellion. By early 1776, pamphleteer Thomas Paine's fiery words in Common Sense swept through the colonies like wildfire. "The cause of America is in a great measure the cause of all mankind," Paine declared, urging independence as not only possible, but inevitable. His arguments gave voice to what many already felt. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted by Thomas Jefferson. Its words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal," were revolutionary not only for America, but for the world. 13 colonies had declared themselves free states, staking their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor on the gamble of liberty. The war expanded. Declaring independence was bold. Securing it was another matter. Britain responded with fury, dispatching the largest expeditionary force it had ever assembled. In the summer of 1776, General Howe's troops stormed New York. Washington's inexperienced army was outmaneuvered, suffering crushing defeats at Brooklyn and Manhattan. Yet even in retreat, Washington preserved his army, slipping across the Delaware River to fight another day. In December 1776, as morale collapsed, Washington struck back. Crossing the icy Delaware on Christmas night, his ragged troops surprised the Hessian garrison at Trenton. Days later, they triumphed again at Princeton. These victories, though small, electrified the Patriot cause, proving that perseverance could overcome despair.
The turning point. Saratoga. War's fate shifted in 1777 at Saratoga, New York. British General John Burgoyne sought to slice New England off from the rest of the colonies, but American forces under Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold surrounded and crushed his army. Burgoyne's surrender in October was monumental. It convinced France that the American cause could succeed. In 1778, France entered the war as an ally, bringing money, soldiers, and a navy that would prove decisive. Spain and the Dutch Republic followed, transforming the colonial rebellion into a global war. Hardships and perseverance. Victory, however, remained distant. Winters were brutal, none more so than at Valley Forge in 1777 to 1778. Washington's men endured freezing temperatures, disease, and starvation. Nearly 2,500 perished. Yet, under the training of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian officer, the Continental Army was forged into a disciplined fighting force. The suffering at Valley Forge became a testament to resilience, the fire that hardened resolve. Meanwhile, the war spread south. British forces captured Savannah and Charleston, dealing severe blows. Yet in the Carolinas, guerrilla fighters like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, harassed the enemy, proving that the spirit of resistance thrived even in defeat. The final act, Yorktown. By 1781, the war reached its climax. British General Cornwallis entrenched his army at Yorktown, Virginia, awaiting reinforcements. Washington, seizing the opportunity, coordinated with French forces under the Comte de Rochambeau and the French Navy under Admiral de Grasse. In September, the Allies encircled Yorktown, bombarding British positions relentlessly. On October 19th, Cornwallis surrendered, effectively ending the war. Bells rang from church steeples, cannons fired in celebration. The impossible dream had become reality. The Treaty of Paris and beyond. 2 years later, in 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed. Britain recognized the independence of the United States, ceding territory stretching to the Mississippi River. The colonies, once subjects, were now citizens of a new nation. The revolution had cost some 25,000 American lives, yet it had birthed a republic founded on ideals that would inspire generations worldwide. The American Revolution was not perfect. Slavery persisted. Native Americans were displaced, and women remained excluded from political rights. But the revolution planted seeds that would grow across centuries, shaping movements for freedom and equality. It proved that ordinary people could challenge empire, that ideals could triumph over tyranny, and that liberty, once ignited, could not be extinguished. Epilogue: A Legacy of Fire. The American Revolution was more than a war. It was a transformation. It forged not only a nation, but an idea that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed. From Boston's tea-stained harbor to the fields of Yorktown, the Revolution was a story of endurance, sacrifice, and astonishing determination. To this day, its legacy burns bright, reminding us that freedom is never given. It is won, preserved, and passed on to future generations.
The Revolution in the West and on the seas. While the main battles unfolded along the eastern seaboard, another theater of war raged in the West. On the frontier, Native American tribes faced impossible choices. Some sided with the British, hoping to stem the tide of American expansion. Others tried to remain neutral. In Kentucky and the Ohio Valley, figures like George Rogers Clark led daring expeditions, seizing British outposts at Kaskaskia and Vincennes. These victories extended American influence and weakened Britain's hold on the Trans-Appalachians. At sea, the fledgling American Navy struggled against the might of the Royal Navy, the most powerful in the world. Yet privateers, essentially legalized pirates, inflicted real damage on British shipping. Perhaps the most famous naval encounter came in 1779, when Captain John Paul Jones, commanding the Bonhomme Richard, clashed with HMS Serapis. As his ship sank beneath him, Jones shouted words that would echo through history: "I have not yet begun to fight." Hours later, it was the British captain who surrendered. Voices of the Revolution. The Revolution was not fought only on battlefields. It was waged in pamphlets, sermons, and taverns. Printers like Benjamin Eads spread revolutionary ideas. Women, too, played crucial roles. Mercy Otis Warren penned political satires. Abigail Adams urged her husband John to remember the ladies in the new republic, and countless women managed farms, businesses, and households in the absence of men. Others, like Deborah Sampson, disguised themselves as men to fight in the ranks. African Americans faced wrenching choices. Thousands sought freedom by joining the British, who promised emancipation. Others fought for the Patriot cause, hoping the rhetoric of liberty would one day apply to them as well. The Revolution did not end slavery.
but it ignited debates that would simmer for generations. International reverberations. The American struggle captured the world's imagination. In France, Lafayette, a young nobleman, crossed the ocean to join Washington, becoming like a son to him. Across Europe, philosophers and reformers hailed the experiment in self-government. The revolution inspired revolts in Haiti, independence movements in Latin America, and debates in Britain itself about the rights of citizens versus the power of kings. Trials of the Republic. Winning the war was only the beginning. The new United States faced enormous challenges: debt, political divisions, and the task of creating a government from scratch. The Articles of Confederation proved too weak, leading eventually to the Constitutional Convention of 1787. Yet the revolution had already done the impossible. It had created a people who saw themselves as Americans, united by shared sacrifice and ideals of liberty.